There isn't as much a crisis of faith, and that doesn't mean that we don't have faith questions, that we don't wrestle with important questions in our lives, but it is a joyful pursuit.
The challenge that higher ed is grappling with is, what is our role today? And how do we reach this generation?
There's a crisis in America today. It's not a crisis of faith. It's a crisis of meaning.
Americans are wondering, is college really for me? We have far too many students who start and don't complete college.
Young people, they're thinking about, what is my purpose? We can use what we know from our faith to help a student think through, who am I?
The cost of higher education can feel like an obstacle, and it can feel like a burden. Students are able to be discerning about what kind of experience they want, and that's why we have increased enrollment in religious education.
It's not just about the degree, but how do I become a great citizen?
Are you producing students that are doing research that are going to go out and solve some of the really difficult world problems?
Imagine if every institution founded by a faith community disappeared overnight. Loyola University would be gone, founded by Jesuits. DePaul University would be gone, founded by Vincentians. Northwestern University would be gone. What if we thought of faith as a bridge and religious identity as a source of pride and inspiration to serve, where we respect religious identity and we recognize it has to operate within the framework of a diverse democracy?
Today we are in Ezra chapters 2 and 3. Let's just remind ourselves where we were in Ezra 1:1. When you serve as a leader of an institution, you're expected to stand in the breach. 10 years ago, I was serving as a university president. A lot of people were asking the question, should faith-based institutions uphold traditional views of marriage or human sexuality? And there was pressure that was put on our institution to see if we might change. And there were a lot of questions and issues from public officials to protests that were held on our campus, and the attacks were personal. And there were many moments when I thought, is this really worth it? I didn't sign up for this. This wasn't the issue I wanted to define my presidency or my life. We make our own markers of identity as a result of trying to figure out who we are. Faith is an important identity marker. We don't know who we are until we know whose we are. In the end, the institution decided, no, that we really believed that our faith commitments shaped who we were, and that also governed our response to human sexuality. But we also realized that we needed to find a way to communicate with folks who didn't share our faith commitments, to recognize with respect and understanding that we don't compel conscience.
I think that there is a concern that being in a religious institution would limit your access to topics and discussion that are happening in the outside world. I found that, in a way, being at a Christian university asks me to pursue those questions even more. We are not blind to the world around us. We should not be blind when we exit here. I think that Taylor wants to provide a space for us to talk about things in ways that challenge us.
If you shape the students who are on your campus today, you shape the communities that they lead 20, 30 years down the road.
I love being with our students. I love being with them at our basketball and football games. I love the way they go out into the world and let the light of Jesus Christ shine through their actions.
I always thought the highest form of education that I would get would be high school. The mission of BYU is to assist individuals in their quest for perfection and eternal life. It's allowed me to see my potential.
At BYU, academic accomplishment and developing your faith in Jesus Christ, those two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Truth is truth. Our students are constantly seeing you do not need to separate the spiritual from the scientific.
At BYU, we strive for an education that is not only intellectually enlarging, but an education that's spiritually strengthening.
Attending devotional is an important and an essential part of being at BYU. We take this time to put everything else aside, to be uplifted and to be strengthened.
This idea that there may be a little bit of tension between kind of the academic pursuits and the things that are religious in nature, I think is a very common concern. And what we really need in these discussions where we find these tension points is a little more intellectual humility.
Good morning. There is such thing as absolute truths, because there's no such thing as truths that can contradict each other. It just means we need to learn more.
I think our students, if they understand that the reason for pursuing an education is to serve God and His children, that permits us to have the humility to say, you know what, I might not have all the answers, but I'm willing to put my trust in God as I chart this path forward to contributing to the world.
Thank you both for joining us today. So excited to have this discussion. President Reese, first question for you. Faith-based universities and their students often feel embattled. Do you have any advice for students about integrating faith in learning in a joyful and a hopeful way?
Well, how's everybody doing? So great to see everyone. Welcome to the Marriott Center. Absolutely. This has a different flavor than oftentimes when we're gathered together, and it's so great to see so many of you. The weather is stunning out there, so I could imagine you had other places you could have been today. So we're grateful you're here with us. And I'm so grateful to have President Lindsay with us. President Lindsay is a great friend, and I love the question because President Lindsay could not be a more perfect person to have here on campus as it relates to this question. He talks about standing in the breach in that video segment that we watched. And President Lindsay has, I think you'll hear a little bit more about that later, but he's a dear friend and I would just say someone from whom our campus community can learn a great deal. So we're grateful to have you with us, President Lindsay. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, when we talk to each other as friends, it's usually Michael and Shane, so we might fall back into that habit. So
we'll try to do it.
First of all, the question is an interesting one because you talk about being sometimes feeling embattled, and I think this idea that you have to feel some tension when it comes to things of academic excellence and spiritual pursuit. I worry sometimes that those things don't need to be in tension. So while there may be issues upon which we find battles or we find some tension, I think more often than not, it's what Dean Bridgewater said in that short video segment, that truth is truth, and oftentimes we may not have a full understanding of the truth in either of those two different spheres, but I think we're seekers of truth, and I think it has every reason for hope and every reason for joy. I just think, President Lindsay, we had something on this campus, which it shouldn't have been the first time that we had it on this campus, but we had a Christmas tree on campus for the first time in our history. It's long overdue, I think. And if you were to look at the gathering of nearly 15,000 of our students, our faculty, and even community members, the joy of being in that moment and celebrating Jesus Christ, His birth, His teachings was a remarkable occasion. And when I walk into the Marriott Center and I see our students with the joy in participating in an athletic contest, when I see them, it's not always that I see them walking in the testing center that there's always that sense of joy.
I understand, yeah.
But there is this idea, I just am so grateful for our students because I see how you reflect the joy in the pursuits that you're engaged in. And so I think that there is, like Ari Berman said in that video, there isn't as much a crisis of faith, and that doesn't mean that we don't have faith questions, that we don't wrestle with important questions in our lives, but it is a joyful pursuit. And I think that our students, I see it in your eyes. I see the excitement that you have, the enthusiasm you have for the endeavor in which you're engaged. And so I'm just inspired by our students. I don't know if I have as much advice, but if I did, one thing it would be is lean into it. Lean into that pursuit of truth, both as to things of your academic disciplines and of the pursuit of the truths of the gospel. I think those two things can happen simultaneously, even though people might tell you otherwise.
Yeah. President Lindsay, how about you?
So let me just say it's a great honor to be here. I think the world of President Reese, and grateful for the work and witness of BYU. On our campus, we have a bell tower in the very center of campus that has two pillars. One represents faith, the other represents learning. And at night, we light up the bell tower, and there's a beam of light that comes up each pillar, and in the night sky, they meet in the heavens. And we said that's really the vision of what we're trying to do at Taylor, is to encourage students to integrate faith and learning. And we do believe that that's a joyful pursuit. And we believe the admonition in Nehemiah that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so we have lots of opportunities where students can be able to experience that joyful spirit of encountering how does your faith make a difference in your academic work. I get the chance to teach an undergraduate class in sociology, my field. We don't do Bayesian statistics, but I'm looking forward to that Pulitzer
But you won't win a Pulitzer Prize either, so.
Well, let's see about that. But I love the fact that my students ask deep questions, and they bring such an energy and a joyful spirit. Being here in the Marriott Center, I think probably one of our favorite traditions on our campus is called Silent Night. It's the last home game of our basketball season before Christmas break. Students come dressed up in lots of different costumes, and the crowd is silent until we score the 10th point, and then they just go crazy. They rush the court, we get 2 technicals, and have a lot of fun. And at the very end of the game, we link arms and we sing Silent Night. I brought a video clip here that I thought may be fun, just so you get a sense of what it is that makes the joy on the Taylor campus.
That was amazing. What an incredible tradition. I love it.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We only rush the court after the game. We have very specific requirements of our students.
Well, I know you're good rule-abiding students, so I understand that.
Absolutely. You saw a picture of that earlier. So one of BYU's strategic priorities revolves around constitutional government and religious liberty. And as this landscape continues to evolve, what gives you confidence in the future of higher education and faith in higher education? And how can our universities be proactive and wise about how we meet some of these challenges? President Lindsay.
You know, I have to say I have a deep respect for the LDS Church, which has really sort of led the way on issues of religious liberty, but also care for your friends and neighbors. I was involved in a lawsuit that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was a BYU alum, Eric Baxter at Beckett, who's, I think, probably the best First Amendment attorney working in the higher education space alive today. And he represented the LDS Church in remarkable ways. And I found that one of the key things we have to do as Christians is we have to demonstrate to our friends and neighbors that we really love and care for them. Even if they don't always agree with our theological convictions, they need to understand we want to be good neighbors. And there's lots of scripture admonitions where we're encouraged to be the kind of neighbor that is going to be a blessing and an encouragement. Jeremiah 29 tells the faithful people to seek the peace and the prosperity of the place where God carried you, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. We've decided that that's a really important admonition for our campus community. We're located in the middle of the cornfields of Indiana, halfway between Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, a very rural location. In many ways, our community has been forgotten by economic development. So we decided that we would try and take on the initiative to say, how could we really invest in our community? How could we spur economic development? We're in the midst of doing a large fundraising campaign. And as part of that, we decided first that we would tithe 10% of the funding that we would secure for the campaign to be a blessing to our friends and neighbors off campus. So how could we help spur economic community development in the little town of Upland, Indiana? And then we were challenged by some of our board members. Actually, Scripture talks about a double portion. And so could we actually double that commitment? So we've set a goal of 20% of our campaign to actually be a blessing to our friends and neighbors. It's called the Main Street Mile Initiative, because there's 1 mile of Main Street between our campus and downtown Upland. And so we set an initiative to try and raise $100 million in the course of about 5, 6, or 7 years. And we're about 95% of the way on that. And it's, I think, a really good opportunity. Well, it's a good opportunity for us as a community to say, hey, we really care for our friends and neighbors who may or may not agree with our theological convictions, but we know that we want to be a blessing. And boy, BYU has done that time and time again. I mean, the legendary stories about how your student athletes, when you're playing away games, how you leave the locker room better than it was when you found it, or how you give ice cream, which, by the way, I had great ice cream last night at the BYU Creamery. Hats off. I love it. It was awesome. But those are visible ways in which you actually bless and serve our friends and neighbors. And I think that the way that we gain the respect of people who don't agree with our theological positions is we say, we're going to be a good neighbor even if you don't agree with us. And in the process of that, you embody the grace and truth of Jesus, which I think is at the heart of what we're trying to do at Taylor and the heart of what you're trying to do at BYU.
Talk about somebody who can really talk specifically about paving the way. I mean, you're literally paving the roads.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing, President Lindsay. And you talked about Eric Baxter. In fact, that reminded me of the first time we met. President Lindsay and I were at a gathering of leaders of Christian colleges and universities in the United States, and I was there as a guest, not a part of this group, but President Lindsay treated me as if I was part of the group. I love that. And as I left, the person who leads this organization is called the Council on Christian Colleges and Universities, CCCU. He said, I don't know if everybody feels, they don't all feel the same way about you being the president of BYU. I'm like, well, it's not the first time people haven't all felt the same way about me. But he said, they're all very certain, though, how they feel about your lawyers.
Yeah, exactly.
They like our
lawyers.
We
love BYU lawyers. That's right.
No, and it is really, I think, we all find, I think, something on which we can build common ground. Yeah. While there are obviously doctrinal differences between many of these universities, there's so much that we share in common.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the way we've been warmly welcomed into that community. I will also say, when I think about your question, Audrey, it's a really good question. I remember I was at a gathering of presidents of universities, not the CCCU, but these were presidents from all over the map. There were presidents from large public universities, large private universities. There were faith-based universities. There were small liberal arts colleges. There were HBCUs. There were community colleges in this gathering of presidents. There's like 100 presidents. I said 100. There were 200 presidents at this gathering. And they had this panel that was convened to ask the question, how do we build trust in higher education? Which I think is an important question. We're kind of at a moment in higher education. And they asked these 7 presidents, all who had been presidents for a long time, how do we build trust in higher education? And 6 of the presidents had almost identical answers to the question. They said, we just have to tell our story better. We haven't done a good enough job of telling our story. And they finally asked the last president on this panel, someone who'd been president for 27 years of his institution, long time. And he sat back in his chair, and he said, with all due respect to my colleagues on the panel. By the way, if anyone ever starts a sentence like that, there is no respect coming.
It's going to be good. Yeah.
Said, with all due respect to my colleagues on the panel, I think what they've just said is bull.
Wow.
I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. And he said, I think what higher education needs at this moment is a bit of humility. And I thought, what a powerful idea. I think, though, faith-based institutions are well situated in that very conversation.
I think that's right.
I hope that we, as faith-based institutions, have a healthy sense of humility. I think it's a commandment, and we need to observe that. This idea that some of the criticisms of higher education, maybe we've earned a little bit. And I think that's a caution that I might add, is that all of us, as we're pursuing education, that we have a healthy dose of humility. I love what one of the members of the officers of our Board of Trustees, President D. Ty Christofferson, taught on this campus. He said, look, education, we don't pursue for our own personal gratification. We pursue education because we believe that it is a means by which we can bless God's children. In fact, our prophet, President Russell M. Nelson, who recently passed, bless his soul, he gave an address on this campus. He said that for members of this church, and I would say for the vast majority of the Christian community, President Lindsay, is a religious responsibility. We feel a responsibility to God's children, and it is, in fact, the difference between merely wishing you can do something to help God's children and actually having the skills and abilities to do so. And I'm so grateful for the students at Brigham Young University who I think enter, and I've met 2 students from Taylor University who I think have a sincere desire within their hearts to really use their education as a means to bless God's children wherever they are.
I think that's clearly a very important point as higher education gets criticized so much, that we've really got a formula for making it better, making it more meaningful. So leaning into that, critics sometimes claim that you can't have academic rigor as well as spiritual conviction. And that's not necessarily what we find at our universities. Can you tell me a time, President Reese, when you were, as president, where you saw faith strengthen scholarship or vice versa?
It's a great question, and I really firmly believe that those 2 things are not mutually exclusive, but rather mutually reinforcing. We really believe that study amplifies faith, and that belief enhances inquiry, and that revelation leads to deeper understanding. They're literally mutually reinforcing. It's not things that are competing with one another. I believe that with every fiber of my being, that we have to do both and do both well, and that actually we're going to be strengthened. President Spencer W. Kimball, in the landmark address for us as a university, President Lindsay, is something called the second century of Brigham Young University, and he talked about the importance of being bilingual. And what he meant by that is as conversant in the language of God as we are in the language of our disciplines. And I think that's a high charge for us as a campus, but one that we take seriously. I think that faith-based institutions are going to do remarkable things in all of the places where you see institutions on the planet contributing. Like we have people who have developed pioneering things on the imaging of the very most fine level cellular kind of imaging that you could have, like you would get at most institutions. Those are remarkable. But we are also simultaneously able to do things like ask different questions. We have a School of Family Life, for example, and I think they ask some fundamental questions. We have, I think, more faculty in the School of Family Life than any other institution on the planet. And they ask questions that can't be asked in other places. Traditional view of the family, like what are the things that contribute to that, to family formation? How is that an important institution in society, and how can it be strengthened? I mean, everything from finances to family formation to what children do to family dynamics. We can answer some of those questions in a faithful way, in ways that others aren't permitted to, in part because the academy has largely abandoned some of those core institutions. So I think we're able to ask different questions, in part because of our faith-based commitments, our moral commitments that we have as faith-based institutions.
Absolutely. Thank you. President Lindsay, how about you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I taught undergraduate classes at Princeton, at Rice, and then at Gordon, where I worked previously, and now at Taylor. I've taught basically the same classes on the sociology of power and leadership. And I gave virtually some of the same assignments, assigned the same text, engaged the students. Sometimes I do oral exams. And I just say the quality of my students at Gordon and at Taylor has been on par with the quality of the student engagement I had at Princeton and Rice. I find that there's not a difference in the quality, and I'm certain that's the case here at BYU, but in a faith-based context, you've got the freedom to ask the bigger questions of life. You're not constrained in that same kind of way, which I think is exactly right. For over 1,000 years, the church tradition, going all the way back to Anselm, the 11th century theologian, who says we want to pursue faith-seeking understanding, and to draw students from all over the world. Our very first international student at Taylor came to Taylor in the late 19th century. His name was Samuel Morris. He was a Liberian prince who actually had to flee his homeland because there was a coup. He took refuge in the home of some American missionaries who happened to be Taylor graduates, and they discipled him in the Christian faith and then encouraged him to pursue higher education. They wrote to the Taylor president and said, hey, would you admit Samuel Morris to come and be a student? It was our first student of color, our first international student in the 19th century. He came and was a legendary figure because he embodied the kind of servant leadership that has that epistemic humility you're talking about. It's a student who says, hey, I'm going to approach this with a posture of faith-seeking understanding. And I think that's really what we want to try and encourage in each of our students. And I think it's the great value of higher ed in our kind of context is that we're willing to tackle the big questions, not shy away from them, because we believe all truth is really God's truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, President Reese, you've described college students as facing a two-headed monster of loneliness and a crisis of meaning. And even as this rising generation becomes less connected to institutional religion, faith-based universities are seeing an increased demand. What do you think that says? President Lindsay, you first. What are these students finding on your campuses? And what does that say about what young people are really longing for?
Well, certainly we see with the advent of expansion of, say, artificial intelligence, it's asking big questions about what we do. I'm really impressed with the work of Megan Sullivan at Notre Dame, philosopher, who says, look, there's 5 things that faith-based higher education has to sort of underscore, even as we recognize that technology is really changing things. One is the value of human dignity, that we believe all people are made in the image of God. We therefore need to embody empathy for one another, that an ethic of love has to be at the center of all that we're doing. And yet we recognize there is a sense of transcendence. We're about something much bigger than just ourselves, and yet there's also a sense of human agency. DELTA, the Delta framework, is what she has said, is really sort of on the leading edge of how faith-based institutions can grapple with some of these big questions of what does it mean to be a human in a day and age where technology is really driving a lot of the focus and the energy. And Taylor and at BYU, we're really committed to helping to say, how do we keep people at the center of what we're doing? We aspire to be as Christ-centered and student-focused as we possibly can. And I think that that's sort of the key of building an educational model that recruits students and draws them in to help them to live into the very best vision of themselves, while also recognizing we're a work in progress. We're all here trying to embody the grace and truth of Jesus as best we can.
Fantastic.
Well, you've said it perfectly. Some of those fundamental tenets I think we share at BYU. We talk all the time about, and in fact, we approach to belonging for us on campus begins and ends with the notion that we are all children of God. And that fundamentally ought to change how we treat one another.
Yeah.
I also think, I spoke with my predecessor, President Kevin J. Worthen, who's an amazing mentor for me personally, one time about the students that enter BYU. And about 7 years ago, I think you all are students, and I would contend that this has some very similar parallels at most institutions. You're called the rising generation for a reason. I think you walked through the doors of this institution with a desire to make a difference in the world. Like when I entered school, most everyone that was entering this university, including Brigham Young University, were asking questions about what kind of job am I going to get? But I think they walk through the doors of these institutions and they're asking questions that are much bigger than that. I think they're asking questions about how can I take the education that I'm getting and how can I go out and make a difference in the world? Not always knowing exactly how to do that, but I think their hearts are molded in a different way. To ask the question, how can I make a difference in the world? Like, I am so inspired by that. It's a beautiful thing to see people walking into the world with a desire to make a difference in the world that desperately needs it. You combine that with a faculty who are striving to provide the kind of education that can help you go out and bless God's children, and it's a powerful combination. I'm truly inspired by you, our students, by your hearts, where your hearts are, that you, in fact, want to make a difference in the world, that you want to bring glory to God. It is a remarkable thing to me, and I love that that's happening on this campus at this moment. I think it brings a momentum with it that is inspiring, and I'm sure that you see the similar things from your students. That they're going to go out and do absolutely remarkable things. They're going to go out and change the world in sometimes what might seem like small ways that will have huge impact on individual lives. And so for that, I'm immensely grateful.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're running short on time, but President Lindsay, do you have anything you'd like to share in conclusion with us?
I'm so excited to be here because my family are BYU groupies. I have a daughter, my oldest daughter, Elizabeth, has a profound intellectual disability. She's 22. And she's become a real fan of music videos on YouTube. And I told President Reese a couple of years ago that she's a huge fan of both Vocal Point and particularly Noteworthy. And she absolutely loves watching a number of different music videos, but Amazing Grace has been a source of great consolation and encouragement to Elizabeth. And so our family has been blessed by the ministry of this place. And I bet I've listened to Noteworthy songs maybe 100 hours, a lot in our house. And it's amazing to see the way in which your ministry reaches out and touches the life of my daughter. Elizabeth will never go to college, so we live on a college campus, but she'll never be a college student. But she feels this connection, and the music really speaks to her in a profound and powerful way. And so you never know how the small contributions, being involved in an a cappella group, could have a ripple effect, half a world away, and make a very positive difference. BYU has always had a legacy of making a positive difference, of being positive contributors to a wider world. And I'm inspired and encouraged by it, and our family is personally really grateful. Jesus tells us to pursue life to the full in John chapter 10. And John's a very careful writer and describes Jesus in chapter 1 of being full of both grace and truth. That's my encouragement and admonition for all of us, to embody the grace and truth to a world in need. And it's a great privilege and partner to be here. We love and appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Thank you both so much for joining us today. This was an incredible discussion, and I appreciate how thoughtful you are, and the shout out to Noteworthy was fantastic. Those are incredible music videos. Can you join me in thanking these great presidents one more time?
Thank you.